go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Trina Thompson, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's virtual Lunch and Learn series session, Cultivating an Effective Nonprofit Board. This event is presented by Black Funders of St. Louis, a local giving circle. Our members are Black people from all walks of life who agree to make an annual contribution of $300 or more, which is then pooled together with donations from non-members to award grants to Black-led nonprofits in St. Louis every year. Since 2007, we have awarded more than $19,000 to local organizations. In addition, we are encouraged to offer our time and talent to support Black-led nonprofits and the community. Our work is rooted firmly in the pursuit of racial equity and a fairer St. Louis. To learn more about us, our grant making, giving circles, and this webinar series, be sure to visit our website at www.blackfundersstl.com. So a few housekeeping items for today's session. You, the audience, will only be able to see the speaker view. This is what we are showing via Facebook Live. This event is being broadcast live on the Black Funders of St. Louis Facebook page. It will be available in recorded form on the Black Funders of St. Louis YouTube channel and website after today's session. Please use the chat box to pose questions to the speaker throughout the talk. We will answer your questions during the Q&A segment of today's session. If you're watching via Facebook Live, you can also drop in your questions using the comment section. For those on the Zoom with us, during the Q&A segment, you will be able to come off mute to ask questions when you're prompted. Please use the raise hand function and we will acknowledge you that way. So today's session is focused on nonprofit board governance, how to cultivate an effective nonprofit board. We're joined today by BFSTL member Marnée Morgan. Marnée is the founder and CEO of Morgan Graves Consultants, LLC, MGC, established in March 2015 as a minority-owned consulting firm. MGC's mission is to provide quality, integrity-based services for clients and partners. Marnée has over 20 years of experience in the business, nonprofit, and education sectors. Her background and experience involves strategic planning, the development of educational-based enrichment programs, leadership development, board governance and development, and the activation of community-based partnerships and coalitions, advocacy, and social justice. Marnée earned her Master of Science in Business Management with a concentration in Leadership and Business Development from National Louis University in Chicago, Illinois, and a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Fontbonne University here in St. Louis. Marnée has a MACA certification in Leadership and Organizational Development from University of Missouri at Columbia, and a Business Development certification from the Missouri Department of Transportation. She is a bridge builder, as well as a community engagement and strategic planning specialist, and has a passion for partnering with leaders, boards, organizations, and communities to drive results-oriented change. Welcome, Marnée, to today's session. Thank you so much for lending us your time and talent today. The screen is now yours.
Thank you so much, Trina, and thank you all, the participants, for joining us today for this very interesting topic around cultivating a nonprofit board. There are so many misnomers that are connected to a board for a nonprofit organization. What does it really mean? How does it work? And essentially, how do we get the most from the people who have decided to invest in our organizations? So today we're going to talk about what is a nonprofit board. What are the fundamentals of board governance? What are the key steps to building a nonprofit board? Looking at the board and the organization from a partnership lens. So those are the areas that we're going to focus on today. And as Trina mentioned, following my overview for these key areas, we will go right into a conversation with you based upon some of the questions that were previously submitted, and then of course, ones that you send during today's talk. So a nonprofit board is the group that is responsible for the strategic management of a nonprofit organization. How I want you to consider strategic management is simply thinking about nonprofit managers. And while the board is referred to as the board of directors, essentially their role from just looking at a perspective of being a comprehensive, creative, and engaging body that has to make decisions with very, very limited resources. The board is guided by the organization's bylaws, very, very important from a governance perspective. And the bylaws represent a set of rules for the organization. And as we talk more about that, I want you to consider not only from a nonprofit management perspective, but also from a investment perspective. I want to point out, as you're cultivating a nonprofit board, we're talking about commitment versus investment. And what I mean by that is, if we go to the fundamentals of board member service, it tells us duty of care, duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. So when you're talking about the word duty, that completely embraces what that role would essentially look like, I want you to think about the role from the standpoint of investment. If you're committed, that means that you signed on to be a part of this board's organization, or this organization's board, pardon me, and you agree to support the organization and you show up for the meetings. That's a commitment. Investment is a totally different perspective, meaning you are invested in the organization's mission, your thoughts, your decisions, the work is tied direct to the mission. Not only are you tied to the mission, you are invested in the mission, you're invested in the organization overall, meaning you have a fiduciary responsibility to support the organization. And everything that happens falls square in the lap of the governing body, which is the board of directors. So when you speak of duty of care, loyalty, and obedience, this is pretty high level in terms of how you want to show up. But the clear takeaway here, if you translate the words care, loyalty, and obedience, it equals to investment. How well you invest in the board itself in terms of the work, your role, is reflecting the organization's ability to grow, to further develop, and have the impacts that they are seeking. Some of the fundamentals of board governance first is to determine the organization's mission and purpose. So if this is a brand new organization, and say there is a founder, and of course, with establishing the nonprofit, once you get to the administrative side of those requirements, such as your 501c3 application, making sure that you have the basics, for pulling this organization together. The next important step is to convene a board. And once you establish who the board members will be, then you want to first look at the development or creating the organization's mission and purpose. Why are we here? What difference will it make for the community for us to be here? Does this mission clearly reflect the values that we expect to put forward with this work? You also want to ensure effective organizational planning. If we take a step back and looking at the connection between the role of a board as in nonprofit management, and nonprofit management essentially means that you're creating an environment and you're creating an opportunity for people to work together in the best possible way to achieve the outcomes with limited resources. So if you're looking at ensuring that you have effective nonprofit management, the driver for that is strategic planning. It's very important from a brand new startup nonprofit, and as well as one who's been established for 20 plus years, larger, more established nonprofit. And either side of the spectrum, strategic planning is critical to ensuring the development and growth of the organization as it relates to mission alignment. And then when you're talking about adequate resources, well, as we all know, nonprofits inherently never have enough to do the work. We just don't. So what we have to do when we're talking about ensuring adequate resources is looking into our board members for their contributions based upon their investment. And that can come in a number of ways. One, some of your board members may have a well-connected, expansive network for which they can tap into to identify things that we need to make the organization work. Two, the building of these partnerships, these collaborations around your mission and the work as it ties to other organizations within the community. And I want to say right here, in building those partnerships, they don't always have to be the exact work that you're doing. Rather, it can be non-traditional partnerships. And typically, when you consider a non-traditional partnership, that means that you have access to resources that are unlike what is available within your organization. When you're talking about the responsibility of the board as it when it refers to, or when it speaks to managing resources, the board's responsibility is to ensure that as you garner funding to support programs and services, that the decision to pursue a particular grant or funding is directly tied to your mission. The board has to be a good steward for what that process looks like, how it is connected to your mission, and ultimately being able to achieve the stated outcomes. When looking at managing resources, you always want to tie that back to effective nonprofit management. And while you don't refer to your board members typically as managers, they are directors. They are the governing body. They set the stage and tone for the organization. I would put a little caveat here when you have a founder who's challenged by what side to support, essentially. Am I on the operational side? Am I the executive director, leader for the organization? Or am I going to be an active board member where I'm making decisions on behalf of the organization? I'm a voting member. What I want to convey here is as a founder, you have a vested interest that transcends seating or convening a board, transcends any partnerships you may develop, and certainly goes beyond any programs and services. It means that this is something very personal for you, and you probably refer to it as your baby. In that space, I want to be clear that when you're cultivating a board and you're convening folk to represent your vision, your dream, you have to make a clear distinction as to what side you want to fully support. If it is on the board side, you don't want to be the CEO or executive director. If it is the CEO, you certainly cannot be a voting board member. What you can do, because I'm sure as the founder, you're most concerned about managing resources effectively. I'm sure you're very concerned about that. You want to look to your bylaws and ensure that there is a clause for protective interest in the organization. So in thinking about fundamentals, as we continue to look at them, the mission and purpose, this is something that should not be established by one person. In fact, this should be the precursor to how you want to align yourself with the community, how you want to establish programs and services, and looking at what your core purpose will be. If you're talking about the programming and services, answer the questions, and the board has to buy in. In fact, not only buy in, the board has to be completely invested and set the tone for what direction the organization is going to go. So say, for example, if your programs are aligned with children's services and you're going to support mental and behavioral health and to offer trauma-informed care to support those children and youth. In that space, very important that there are very strict program guidelines in how this will be implemented. It has to tie to the mission. The mission has to drive how you will roll out these programs and services. And your strategic planning process should clearly define what is the purpose, what programs and services will we offer, what timelines are needed, and then finally, and not finally, I'm just giving you some high level examples, and the next thing to consider is those impacts. You're also talking about a board who is reflective of the organization's values, positioning in the community, and just how you are regarded overall. I will say that if you are a new startup organization and you're talking about seating a board and you want to ensure that the public image is that of your mission, it's clearly reflecting your mission and your values, I would identify board members who are already stakeholders in the community, particularly the communities that you plan to serve. Very important that your board is reflective of the people you're serving. It's so often that we get caught up in identifying titles or roles for our board members, and we don't consider the best directors for what you want to achieve within your community are people who look like your community. That is the best way to establish that public image, and whereby we don't always emphasize the diversity of a good board because we're looking at how we can pull in and leverage our opportunity to garner more grant funding. So we certainly want to align ourselves with people with that expansive network that I talked about a little bit ago. I want you to take a step back, trust the mission, trust your vision, and ensure that as you convene a board, either starting brand new or you're trying to restart your board, jumpstart it, if you will. Think about a board that clearly is invested in the community now and reflects the people that you want to serve. Court of Appeal, when you're talking about a board, that means that the CEO or executive director, leadership staff of a nonprofit essentially reports to the board of directors. So when there are issues within the organizational operations, administration, and the like, those issues typically are resolved within the board setting. So the board typically does not get involved with day-to-day operations or administration, hiring, terminations, spending, except within the bylaws. I want to put a caveat there with spending. Within the bylaws, there should be some reference to spending authorization that exceeds a certain amount. Your board, remember I mentioned at the top, is a fiduciary agent for the organization. Therefore, they have to know how the money is spent. So if the CEO has a spending clause of just say $5,000, everything above that amount has to be approved by the board chairman. When you're talking about Court of Appeal, which is where I started, when there is conflict within the leadership team or just the organization overall, and let's use that example for spending for one. Say if the approval for a certain expenditure did not go through to the board, it was reported that there was a fallout. The board can be utilized in that manner to mediate and hopefully resolve the situation. Does this normally happen with a full board? No. Typically, there is a committee that would address either personnel, administration, or operation issues. Finally, we're looking at, from a governance lens, assessment of your performance. The best tool to do this is, again, with your strategic plan, because within your plan, you have certain benchmarks or milestones, you have a work plan, and it is incumbent upon the board as well as the leadership team to review that work plan to see where you are in the process, redirect any strategies that you may have fallen short or you didn't get to. Basically, it is a critical component to constantly assess where the organization is going through that strategic plan. Also look at actual program evaluations, and the board should be a part of the decision in how those evaluations are carried out. When you're talking about a time commitment for a board member, I would say it actually depends on the size of the organization. Now, with large organizations, the board commitment typically ranges anywhere from 3 to 5 years. That's an average. If it's a smaller organization, meaning they don't have the capacity, they do not have everything established with regard to the organization. So hence, this is a working board that essentially carries out the roles of the programs and services. When you're talking about the commitment there, it can be ongoing. But what I would recommend in this space for any board to keep ideas fresh, to renew the commitment, to look at the investment overall and what return you're getting with this particular board member. I would say an average board member tenure should be 2 years. Built into your bylaws should be the timeline for the board, what is necessary to phase that board member out, put them back in. I also would say for your officers of the board, 1 year. It should not be the same officers such as your board chairman, vice chair, secretary, treasurer. Those positions should cycle out after a year. Is it hard and fast? No. But you don't want the same individuals having that much control over the direction and growth of the organization. You want to extend the opportunity to have new ideas, new commitments, fresh commitments and vision and investment. If it's working and everybody is on one accord, do you just say, oh, 1 year is up, change? No, it is according to your bylaws. Whatever you've placed in there, that's what you would follow. So if you said that your officers will stay 3 years, they stay 3 years. When you're talking about talent that's being shared with a nonprofit, oftentimes we look to those positions that we feel are going to best support our organizations: attorneys, accountants, looking at folks who are vested in the areas where our programs and services are aligned. That's all good. I would also ask or recommend that you consider folks that you'll be serving as part of your board. I would look at the community at large. Also, thinking about folks who you feel that they may not have this professional credential per se, but they have the creative, visionary ability to engage people. They also have a network and can really help support the direction of this board. If you take a look at, can we go back to that previous one real quick? the previous slide. The last one is in terms of commitment, what treasure must I contribute? I'm going to simplify that by saying your investment, period. To what degree you are invested in the organization and the mission. When you're talking about the key steps to building out a nonprofit board, I mentioned quite a bit of those things, but you first want to evaluate your current composition, meaning where you're starting. Are you trying to revamp your board, or are you starting from scratch? If that be the case, as the founder of this nonprofit, you are solely responsible for engaging or convening folk around your vision. Be sure that in any scenario, be it you're revamping, you're trying to revitalize and create a spark in your board, I would say have a conversation with that person around where they are in the community. If they're not community centric, and that certainly ties to recruitment and selection, I would defer any decision until you've continued to talk and consider conversations with individuals who are currently community stakeholders. Orientation and training is extremely important. If you do not have the capacity to do it yourself because you're a small startup nonprofit, invest in consultants who can help you with that. Board governance training, such as what is being offered today, or look at organizations who can support that. There are nonprofit organizations who have within their capacity to actually provide this, and I definitely would do it. The most important aspect of building out a nonprofit board is when you come down to number 4, agreements and descriptions. When you recruit a person to support your organization, very important that there is an established agreement that is considered by the founder or either current board members, and it is signed for a specific time period for service. That agreement should also include any monetary assessments that would come from your role as a board. The job descriptions is primarily tied to officers. What are their roles in terms of leading the board and leading the organization, as well as an overview of the role of the actual working board members. They may not have an officer's title, but there is a certain responsibility. And then finally, the board chair should convene the board around evaluating their governance, how effective it has been, and what impact it has had on the organization overall. When you talk about roles and responsibilities, the chairman is the person who provides oversight not only for the board of directors, but for the organization itself. Typically, the organization's CEO, executive director, president, whatever that title is, reports to the entire board with direct interaction with the board chair. The remaining officer titles, committee chair or vice chair, secretary, treasurer, these are subjective roles that depend on the size of the organization, depending on how the board has functioned heretofore, in meaning the size of the board, how engaged the board members are, level of commitment, all of that would help to define the other roles. But I will say, for any makeup of a board, be it a large or small organization, there should essentially be three key officers. One is the chair, one is the secretary, and one is the treasurer. Now, in a smaller setting, you can combine the secretary treasurer position. You can definitely do that, but you have to have a chair. I recommend an odd number for your board with regard to voting purposes and to ensure that you can have the best opportunity for a quorum. A smaller organization, 3 to 5 board members, larger can exceed that number. When you're talking about, and we're moving to the next slide, the dynamic between the board organization and partnership. That's exactly how I would recommend you view the relationship between the CEO and the board. It's a partnership. It should never be adversarial. You should be working in tandem around how the organization will be managed. What is the direction of the organization? How do you want to move forward? In fact, the CEO and board chair should really work very, very closely together at all times. When you talk about a founder, and I want to come back to that because so often that's the scenario or basis for starting a nonprofit. You have an individual or individuals. They have a vision. They think about, hey, we could really help the community in this way. Well, when you are the founder, it's hard for you to process that, wait a minute, I report to this body. It's hard, but I want to challenge you to consider that, first of all, it helps you to remove any inference of conflict, be it direct or appearance. That's number one. And in funding partnerships, that conflict has to be non-existent. The second piece is when you are working in tandem with the board, you understand, or your chair, you understand that it's a shared vision. It's a shared commitment. It's a shared investment. So when you're thinking about it, if you look at this chart, you're talking about a partnership that transcends you as a founder. You're talking about a partnership that is central to the mission and the impact that you ultimately will have on the community as a result of your programs and services. As I close the actual presentation and to start to look at your questions, I want to leave you with some clear takeaways when you're talking about cultivating a board. I want to re-emphasize or reiterate, ensure that your board is reflective of the values, the mission, and just your overall reflection of the communities that you're serving is so important. Try not to emphasize or focus solely on positions, titles, because remember, people in the community that you're serving, they have networks too. They have resources that can be tapped into. perhaps not monetarily, but valuable nonetheless. I also want to say that it's important to keep your board fresh. Long-standing members, 5 and 10 years, you're not going to get the best possible vision for where you can go with your organization. Lastly, remember that the board is functioning in a way that they have to be comprehensive stewards, creative, engaging, with very, very limited resources. Therefore, an internal partnership between the organization's leadership and staff and team and the board is critical. We'll take your questions now, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Marnée. Thank you for the presentation, and for also just putting it out there, reminding us that the crucial role that a board plays with an organization, understanding that it is more than just a list of names on a paper or meeting a requirement to become a 501c3, but that, you know, a board actually has a role, an important role to play, not only in the establishment of your organization, but the sustainability of your organization. And those key takeaways are very, very helpful when we think about being strategic and surround, you know, even as a founder of an organization, surrounding yourself with people that are going to help you to move that forward in a way that will be beneficial to the community. Being reflective of your organizational values, as well as the community served, that's big. You know, I have to really lift that up as well as a key takeaway. I love that. And the fact that in partnership with your board, as a founder, as an executive director, even as a staff person, there is a shared vision. And that's really the only reason why you're even together. That's what brings you to that place together as an organization, that shared vision that helps you to control or to see your mission fulfilled, and that the community that you are targeting receives a benefit and impact. That's awesome. So we're going to move to questions and answers. We're going to start with the questions that have already been submitted, but please, you know, you're welcome to submit questions in the chat, as well as you can raise your hand, but we're going to go ahead and lift up these questions. So I'm going to bring these questions up for myself so that we can move to another view. So just give me a minute. So I'm trying to look at chat, getting my instructions from tech as well as doing this. So so let's start with Charlotte submitted a question or a point that she would like to see addressed in this session, and that's speaking on governing community advisory boards. Marnée.
So typically, an advisory board is an extension of a full board of directors. So the governing component usually lies within the board of directors, and the community advisory board funnels up any suggestions, plans, or just an overall vision to the full board. In the space where this community advisory board has convened, independent of any other organization or board, and how will they govern? Well, similar to any other board, you will have specific procedures that you follow. You will have some type of leadership established within that advisory board, and you have some accountability for the work that you're doing.
Awesome. So our next question, what is the usual term or length of service as a board member? And I think you covered some of this. This is a question that came from Trent.
Yeah, but the average time that I recommend for a board member would be a officer 1 year and just service on the board 2 years.
Awesome. What common perks, incentives, benefits can be considered to offer to board members? And this question comes to us from Philip.
Well, I don't know that there are any specific perks or incentives, because what you're speaking of typically aligns more with a corporate board setting, where with larger corporations, they actually have a stipend, if you will, for board member participation. In talking about the space of nonprofit, it's completely volunteer. It is based upon the investment as an individual that you want to make to that particular organization and community. I would say the perk or incentive that you can offer to recruit a person would be to keep in mind that this is a time commitment. So try to keep it to a minimum. Ensure that you are always on point, very well organized, so that the person who's donating or contributing their time, they feel like they can do the work with as least amount of challenge to them for their time and their talents and their investment.
Awesome. All right, so this next question is from Octavia, and she's on with us today, and I just want to make sure I am reading her question properly. So if I'm not, Octavia, feel free to unmute yourself and help. So how can a board be effective when, I think it's when several are serving multiple positions in the organization? I'm not sure if it's when the board members are or when the executive director has multiple positions in the organization.
That kind of speaks to a small nonprofit where it's a working board, and they're not only trying to provide the leadership or governance, but they're actively supporting programs and services. If in that space is what you're doing, you want to be very clear in terms of the roles, either through your bylaws, either through procedures. You need to have it very clear what the roles are. Remember, I mentioned at the top that it is not okay for an actual organization team or leadership member to also serve on the board, particularly in a voting capacity. So to not to blur the lines, I would say have very clear guidelines, procedures in place for understanding.
And we only have about 2 more minutes. So I'm going to ask a quick question and then one other question. What is the legal minimum number of people an organization is required to have on their board? The legal minimum number.
For a board, the legal minimum, is 3. That's the legal. And actually, I'm going to be very honest and forthcoming. You can have one board member, but look, in that space, you can't vote because everything is going to be with that one person. So if you want to keep it clean in the face of your funders or your potential funders, I would say no less than 3 board members. Always err on the side of a odd number for quorum purposes.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you 1 minute to answer this one question.
Sure.
This is not gonna be fair, Marnée, but it's a good question.
We got 6 minutes actually.
How do you find financial board members? And I'm thinking of this in 2 ways. Board members who will contribute financially to your organization,
right?
And also board members with financial experience.
In both scenarios, Trina, what you want to do is have those conversations within either your network or a network that someone you know is connected to, and ensure in that conversation that the person it has an interest in your organization and the work that you're doing. I believe personally with a board who is set to try and support the direction of the organization, there should be some monetary requirement, be it an annual assessment, nominal, but still something. And I like what you said earlier, the sustainability of the organization, because as you're starting out, you don't always have funders in your pocket. In fact, there are things that you have to go through in order to position yourself for that funding. So what do you do before you get there? You identify folks who's willing to invest in the organization, not just their time, but monetarily as well. And I would not assess anything like $1,000 a year, but something that would allow you to have some basic working expenses covered.
Right. So one other question, I've been given permission to do one more question.
Sure.
That I don't believe you covered in the presentation, but it's a good one. Just in terms of, things change, people change, organizations change, times change, pandemics happen, and you may have a board member who's no longer a fit, or maybe they're just not showing up, or maybe they're not showing up appropriately. How do you ask board members to step down?
That's a very good question. First of all, you shouldn't have to ask the board member to step down, because your bylaws should contain information relative to that service. Also, an agreement should be established at the onset, and there should be a clause in that agreement that says, if X, Y, and Z is not accomplished, and let's keep it simple, you should meet at least 8 of 12 board meetings a year. You've met 2. The agreement says if you didn't meet the 8, you can be asked to leave. We don't want to make it personal or hard, because we don't know fully what the issues are with that person who only made 2 board meetings out of the whole year. Keeping in mind that some folks have different motivations for being on boards. It might be symbolism, like just to say, by reputation, I sit on the board of Black Funders, or I sit on the board of Deaconess Foundation. It might be symbolism. In that space, you really don't know. So to keep all of the assumptions and inferences out of the picture, have it clearly stated what the guidelines are. So when it comes time to unseat that board member, it can be done.
Yeah, I mean, that's also reiterating again the whole need to be strategic, and how that can save your organization from a lot of drama and unnecessary pain points by setting clear expectations, particularly when it comes to board and your boards and how they serve. That is awesome. Thank you again, Marnée, for lending us your time and talent today.
Sure.
We've learned quite a bit. You've given folks a lot to chew on, and we really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Miranda.
Thank you, Trina and Marnée. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Miranda Richardson, founder and president of Black Funders of St. Louis. Thank you all for joining us today for our June webinar, where we're focusing in on nonprofits and board governance. So thank you, Marnée Morgan, for your time and your expertise today, as well as thank you to the membership committee for putting this all together, and you all being able to join us today. In addition to today's conversation, we would like to hear from you. There will be a link in the chat, as well as a follow-up for a survey. The survey is brief. It's an opportunity to weigh in and let us know how we're doing. Also an opportunity to let us know if there are additional topics that you would like to have covered. Again, if you could take a moment to complete the brief survey, that would be greatly appreciated. As we wrap up today's webinar, I just want to highlight that August is Black Philanthropy Month. And during the month of August, we like to elevate the importance of giving both financially, but also our time. And so August, we will have 4 webinars scheduled. You'll note that the dates are provided along with the topics. We hope that you will register as you see fit along the topics as well as your availability. Again, this is an opportunity to go deeper in conversation as well as to continue to support Black-led nonprofit organizations. So we hope that you will be able to participate. In addition to the webinars, August is our Black Philanthropy Month grant cycle. So we will have funding opportunities available during the month of August as well. So hopefully if your organization priority is around civic engagement, this may be an opportunity for you. So hopefully between the funding cycle in August, as well as the 4 webinars we have scheduled, we'll have a chance to see you again. Again, August, Black Philanthropy Month, we're elevating the importance of giving. This is a huge effort and we can't do this alone. So we hope that you will join us again. Also thinking about how you can be a part of Black Funders of St. Louis, whether it's by giving your time, your talent, or your treasures. Again, this work takes a lot. So we hope that you all will consider how you can get involved. Again, thank you to Marnée Morgan for your time today and your expertise, as well as our membership committee, and to all of you for being a part of today's conversation. Again, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again in August.